Hello and welcome to Fashion Bites. I'm Ellen Byerrum, the author of The Crime of Fashion Mysteries, featuring Lacey Smithsonian, a fashion reporter in Washington, D.C., the city that fashion forgot. Now, we've all heard that the greatest generation lived during the era of World War II. The men and women rose to the challenges of war, long separations from loved ones, and the everyday challenges on the home front, such as rationing. In other words, making do or doing without. And today it is my great pleasure to speak with Marge Muzzillo, who served as a United States Marine during that war. So I'm going to ask some questions and then we're just going to let it ride. Before you joined the service, you worked in Kansas City.
That is correct.
Right. So why don't you tell us how you decided to be a Marine, and why did you choose the Marine Corps as opposed to one of the other services?
Well, I had in my second job in Kansas City, circumstances changed. My supervisor was promoted, and I wasn't too happy with his replacement. And I think this was the impetus to at least do something else.
Make a change.
And all over town were those gorgeous posters of the women in their greens with their little red cord on their hat and say, "Be a Marine, free a Marine to fight." And people were doing an awful lot of things toward the war effort.
That's right.
And so that seemed to me to be a great thing to do. I was only 20, therefore I had to get my parents' permission.
Imagine that.
and my father had gone through a series of things, but with my older brother and sister, to where that he finally realized that he could not dictate to his children. So he refused by the time I was 20 to tell me what he thought I should be doing, but would come up with pluses and minuses. And I was allowed to make up my own mind. Well, I'm sorry, his pluses and minuses didn't mean a darn thing to me.
And that's a good thing, isn't it?
And so I went ahead and actually officially enlisted in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Okay. What was boot camp and gun training like when you were in there?
Well, we World War II women were so pampered compared to what happens with Marines today.
Oh, really?
We not only had our completely separate area without any men being allowed in there after curfew, but we also did things. Boot camp itself was mostly occupied with taking tests to find out how they could best use our services. And so a lot of time was spent in a darkened theater.
Wow. Going
through various little exams of one kind or another, like listening to sounds and distinguishing which were alike and which were different to see if we could become radio operators. Or of course, we also did a bunch of written work.
Right.
And
so you didn't crawl through an obstacle course?
No, absolutely not. In fact, one day we were taken out to a rifle range and were allowed to shoot a rifle.
Okay.
And we also were shown how to wear a gas mask.
Okay.
And I'm not sure just what else, but this was about the size of our military training. The rest of it was a matter of kind of their deciding which women would work best in what positions. Now this was today before computers, you understand.
Oh yes.
And their personnel system was one of the strangest things that you can imagine. There were maybe 16-inch square pieces of cardboard.
Okay.
And they had little circles all the way around the outside, and each one was coded to a different activity. And so somebody had gone through our test results and had taken little clippers and opened a circle here and a circle there, so that when you ran, you had a series of cards sitting there together, and ran a wire through this little hole in the cards.
Mercy.
The ones that you qualified for this particular activity, the cards all dropped off, and that was how they decided what you were capable of doing.
Well, you made out pretty well, though, didn't you?
Well, I had done secretarial work almost all my life, so they put me in headquarters company, and I was responsible for the accuracy of the records which went to Washington, D.C. of the activity of all 2,500 women on the base.
That is a lot to be responsible for. And before you told me that it was 2,500 women, but how many men were there?
At least 25,000.
So that's quite a
Oh,
disparity
yes.
in proportion.
Oh, a very in proportion, and the men were so extremely polite because they all knew that there was another man around the corner if they didn't qualify to continue to go out with a girl.
Now, I think that's pretty good myself. You know, if you have to train them one way, that's not too bad.
That was absolutely great. Yeah.
So you were always treated well by all of the Marines on base.
This is very, very true. Always treated very, very well.
Yes. And what rank did you hold?
I went to NCO school directly out of boot camp, so I was a corporal for several years, and then became a sergeant, and was a sergeant when I was discharged. Yeah.
Okay, and how long were you in the Marines?
I was on active duty from November 1943 to December 1945.
So that was a good long experience for you.
Well, it was my growing up years, really, because I was, when I look back, I think, what a naive child I was when I went in there.
Well, okay, so Marines make men out of boys and super women out of women, I guess you could say.
You may say so, dear. I'll allow that one, whether I believe it or not.
Okay, so what was the hardest thing to get used to?
Having to actually use my experience as an NCO and drill women in their marching.
Okay, that's something to think about. I didn't know. Can you tell us about your uniform? You know, because obviously this is Fashion Bites, so I want to know what the uniform was like. And
well, the winter uniform was a very nice forest green wool. We had the caps with the bills and the little red ribbon across them, and our lipstick, by the way, had to match our red ribbon, whether we were blonde or what we were.
So whether it matched your skin tone or not, it had to match your cap.
That's right.
Well, somebody was thinking about it, the accessories.
But the everyday summer uniform was not anything that anyone would really want to wear.
Okay.
It was a little seersucker two-piece one with fake green buttons and
Oh my. Well, we do know that seersucker was developed in the South. So at least it was sort of geographically correct to be wearing.
But they wore, but it was, except for in San Francisco, it was nationwide.
Yeah. What happened in San Francisco?
They wore winter uniforms year-round.
Oh. I had no idea. Isn't that interesting? Now, how did you wear your hair? Did you have to have it off your collar? Was that part of the rule?
Part of the rule was, and my hair was fine and did not hold a curl well, so it was quite a struggle to keep my hair above the collar.
So was it longer? Your hair longer? And you wore it up?
Well, we, in those days, dear, we wore our hair with curls.
Yes.
And so that the kind of short bob that I'm wearing now would have been ideal, but of course, we couldn't have anything that practical.
Oh, well, that's funny. What were your favorite things to wear outside of work?
The base had a golf course, and I went out and learned to do some golfing on the golf course. I always enjoyed choral singing, so that I was part of the Protestant chapel choir.
Okay.
We tried various things. In our women's battalion, we had a little structure that it contained pool tables, and we tried that.
That's
and
nice.
despite the fact that I could never learn to ride a bicycle, people did bicycle around.
Oh, mercy.
I had a number of Marines thought they could teach me how, but I could do well on a straightaway, but as soon as I tried to turn a corner, I couldn't get my balance. So I was never able to ride a bike my entire life.
Well, there you go. Did you have any particular styles of clothes, or were you never into clothes as much? Or it was probably a relief to wear a uniform every day. If you don't like clothes.
Didn't have to think about it. Well, in the early days of the 1940s, our summer wear was a cotton frock.
Right.
And then in the wintertime, why, we probably had handmade wool skirts with sweaters or that sort of thing. But I did not get into a lot of really
Faddish fashions.
Yeah.